Welcome back. This is Dr. Vishal Trivedi from Department of Biosciences and Bioengineering, IIT Guwahati, and let's continue our discussion about the sexual reproduction. So, as we discussed in the previous class, that sexual reproduction actually involves three different process or three different events. So, what are these events? You have pre-fertilization events, then you have fertilization, and then you have post fertilization. Okay. So, within the pre-fertilization events, we have many types of. So, what are all the events which are actually within the preparation of the fertilization are falls under the pre-fertilization events. And what are these events? We have two major events within the pre-fertilization events. One is called gamete formation or the gametogenesis. Or okay. So, as we discussed previously also, there are two different types of gametes are possible in organisms. One is called male gametes and the other one is called female gametes. Majority of the organisms, the male and female gametes are very different from each other in terms of structure as well as in terms of the their morphology, and because of that the gametes could be of two different types. One is called isogametes so within the isogametes, the male and female gametes are identical in morphology. This kind of isogametes are mostly found in the lower plants such as algae, and where the the gametes are indistinguishable from male and female gametes. And then you have the heterogametes. Heterogametes in the heterogametes, you have male and female gametes. Different in morphology and their activity. In most of the cases where we have found the heterogametes, the male gamete is very small. So, in the case of heterogametes, the male gametes are small and they are motile, and their main job is to carry the genetic information from the male individual and give it to the female individual, and they are actually be the species or the molecule which are actively participating into the fertilization process, whereas the female gamete is known as is big, large and non-motile, and the purpose of being a large female gamete is because it contains very large quantity of cytosol, and that actually provides the nutrition for the development of embryo. So, in the case of female gametes, actually provides the nutrition for developing embryo. In majority of the higher plants as well as in the higher animals, the female gametes are mostly been responsible for providing the machinery to run the biological processes. For example, the mitochondria or the chloroplast, mitochondria in the case of animals, whereas in the chloroplast or the mitochondria in the case of plants are mostly being supplied by the female gametes. Okay? And because the male gametes and the female gametes are very different, their names are also very different. So, male gametes are called as microgametes or spermatozoa in the case of animals, whereas in the case of female it is known as macrogamete or ovum in the case of animals. Then because the male and female gametes could be produced by the different types of individuals, or it could be produced by the single individual. That is why the most of the organisms are either having the ability to produce the male or female gametes, or they are having the ability to form either the male gamete or the female gamete. So, accordingly the organisms are also being classified on their ability to contain to produce the male or the female gametes. So, on this basis the organisms are either the unisexual. So, in the case of unisexual, there is a separate male and female gametes, male and female individual, whereas in the case of bisexual there is it contains both male and female sex organ. There are advantages as well as the disadvantages of organisms for either following the unisexuality or the bisexuality. In the case of unisexuality, you can imagine a situation where there is one male, okay, and there are several females. Okay. So, in that case and as we discussed that the females are actually important for providing the egg, they can have the multiple eggs, okay, and as a result they can have the multiple offsprings. That is the advantage of having a unisexuality, means a single male can actually provide the male gametes for the fertilization with the several females, and that is how it actually will be an efficient process to provide to increase the population of the individual. But what is the disadvantage? The disadvantage is that these male and the female are the physically separated from each other, and because of that these two individuals has to come closer to so that their respective gametes could be able to meet and go for the fertilization, and that actually reduces their efficiency. So because of that the overall efficiency may be down compared to the bisexual mode of sexual reproduction. Whereas in the case of bisexual mode, a single individual can have the self fertilization, and because it can have the self fertilization, it does not require the other individual into the vicinity, and that is very important for most of the endoparasites. So, such as the fluke worm. Okay. So, in the case of fluke worm or the Tenosolium, which actually is a parasite in our intestine, it actually remains in our intestine, and there is no probability that these parasites will have the male and female together, male and female will come. So, imagine a situation where only the male is present. So, in that case that particular parasite will not be able to replicate and will not be able to increase its number, and because of that kind of constraint, the organism decided to go for the bisexuality, and because of that it actually has both the male and female sex organs. So, they can actually do a self fertilization, and as a result they can increase their number without being dependent on the other individual. What is the disadvantage? The disadvantage is this, that because the single individual is actually having the both parts, it actually cannot do multiple rounds of fertilization. It can only do a fertilization with a limited number of period of time. But on the other hand, the disadvantage what we have with the unisexuality, that it require a medium so that the male gametes could go and meet with the female gametes. That efficiency is very high in the case of bisexuality, and because of that there is a third class which is called as sequential bisexuality. So, what is mean by sequential bisexuality means is, because the bisexuality is advantageous in most of the endoparasite as well as the organism which are mostly remain in the solitary environment, which are not having the ability to have the other individual. Some of the organisms actually go for the sequential bisexuality. In the sequential bisexuality means that the society may have the male or the female, okay, and depending on the environmental conditions, the males could get changed to the female, or female could get changed into the male. The classical example, there are two examples which we are going to see to understand what is mean by sequential bisexuality. So, one example is the coral reef. So, coral reef fish. Okay. So, in the coral reef fish, what we have is, we have the one male. So, in the coral reef fish society, what we have is one male and the several females. Okay. So, okay. So, because on this condition, as I said, that one male with several female is advantageous because it can produce more number of offsprings, but the society, since the society is depending only on the one male and several female, what happen is, under the events of the death of this particular single male, all the females decide, and then it actually cause a induced event that one of the biggest female in the society is turning into the female, into the male, and it actually transform itself into in such a way that it gets converted into the male, and the rest of the female then is ready to have a sexual reproduction with this biggest female, and that actually is a, so that the life cycle continues. The example 2 is the with the oyster. So, in the oyster, the examples are completely different. So, the second example is the oyster. In the case of oyster, they are very different. So, what they have is, they do not have the females, what they have is the males, and these males are either be in two categories. There are males which are big, and there are males which are small. And in this case, what happened is, the one of the big male within the society get transformed into a female, and this single female is then ready with the is available for producing the eggs, whereas these males are is responsible for producing the male gametes. The advantage of this kind of situation is that it actually allows the because the female is responsible for producing the egg, the female produces large number of eggs, and those get fertilized with the these available males. So, this is the one example. Okay. So, in the gametogenesis, the gametogenesis is a very controlled process, and it actually happens in a very specialized organ known as the sex organs. And so, in the process of gametogenesis, what you have is, you actually going to have the cell division. Okay. So, initially all these sex organs, so male will have male sex organ, so all these male sex organ multiplies, initially multiplies by multiplies and then form the cells. Okay. And these cells then multiply by meiosis to form the male gametes. So, because of that, the male is diploid, whereas the male gametes is haploid. Same is true for the female. In many of the animals, and then you will have cells, and then that get meiosis, and that actually will form the female gamete. And this is the N. Okay. So, cell division is important, and in these cases the cell division is mitotic, so that there are large number of pool of cells which are being developed in the sex organs, and then these cells actually goes for the meiotic division, and that is how all these germ cells get converted into the respective gametes. These gametes are as we discussed, they could be small or they could be large, and the second step is the transfer of gamete. So, once the gametes are formed, they have to be transferred, because we are talking about the sex organs. So, all sexual reproduction. So, both of these gametes have to meet each other, so that they can go for the fertilization, and this transfer of gamete is a very controlled process, and it actually happens in a different class of organisms. So, in the lower in the lower plants, such as algae, Bryophyta, or the Pteridophyta, the male gamete is motile. It contains flagella, okay, and male and female gametes are identical. Okay, so they are isogametes. And in these cases, the male gamete is motile. It contains the flagella, and because it contains flagella, it can actually swim into the water, and that is how with the water as a medium, it reaches to the female gametes, and ultimately they both get fertilized to form the zygote, and that zygote then develops into the embryo, and that embryo then develops into the plant. Whereas in the case of higher plants such as the Angiosperms or the Gymnosperms, this is not the process, and there are several differences from the lower plants. In the case of the higher plant, the male gamete is non-motile, okay, and it requires a medium to get to reach to the female gamete, okay, and female gamete is formed within a specialized structure which is known as the flower. So, male and female gametes both are formed within a specialized structure known as flower. These flower could be as I said, they can be unisexual or they could be bisexual. So, these flowers could be the unisexual or bisexual. Accordingly, since in both of these cases, whether it is a unisexual or the bisexual, then since the male gamete is non-motile and it requires a medium to reach to the female gametes, and this process of transferring the female gamete, male gamete to the female is known as the pollination, because the male gametes are present within the pollen grains, and this pollination means the transfer of male gamete to the female sex organ or female gamete. Okay. So, in this process what happen is the male gametes which are actually being developed on the flowers, they actually can take the help from different medium. These medium could be air. So, you can have the air pollination, you can have the water as a media. So, water pollination, you can have the animals, and this is required only because the two individuals, the flowers which are producing the which are producing the pollen grains, and the flower which contains the female gametes are different. So, in these cases it is called as cross pollination, whereas in the cases when the plants contain both the both the male and female flowers on the same plant, it becomes the self pollination. So, in that case there is no medium is required, and the male and female goes and bind. Because this is the male gametes are non-motile, there is a large number of male gametes has to be produced to successfully achieve the fertilization, and that actually is a very important event, because in this case because they use the air, water, or some animals or birds and other kind of medium to reach to the female sex organ. During this journey the male gametes get destroyed. So, but once they reach to the female gamete, they become go and fertilize with the female. Then the third class is the organisms. In the animals, they have male germ, male gamete, which is motile, okay, and the female gamete, which is non-motile. Okay. Next, is the fertilization. Next event is the fertilization. So, in the case of case of fertilization, there could be different types in different ways. The male and the female sex organs, male and female gametes could come together and develop into a embryo. Okay, and because of that, the fertilization as well as the subsequent development can be divided into three different categories. What are these different categories? We have the organisms, where there is a external fertilization and this is more common in the case of animals, and external development of embryo. What does that mean is that the male and female gametes are being present outside the organism body, and then they fuse to each other to form the zygote, and then these zygotes get developed into the embryo or the organism outside. So, this whole process occurs outside. The examples are fishes and the frog. In these cases, what happens is you have male and you have the female. Let us take an example from the frog. So, what happens is that during the mating period, when these two organisms, when these particular two individuals are present outside, what happens is the female actually gives eggs, and these eggs are present within the pond, okay, and they are being put together within a jelly. Okay. So, this is the jelly and these are the eggs, okay, and they are in the pond, and then the male actually comes and gives its own male gamete, okay, and then then this male gamete actually fuses with the egg to form the zygote, and that zygote then develops into the tadpole or the embryo, and that tadpole then eventually get evolved into the frog. So, because you are having the external fertilization as well as the external development, there is always chance of losing these eggs. For example, if the frog is giving these eggs in the pond, there is no protection to these eggs, and they can be taken up or they can be eaten up by the fishes. Same is true for the fishes. If the fishes are giving the eggs in the pond, they may be eaten up by the other fishes or as well as the other organisms. Second, since this is all happening in running water, the number of male gametes which are going to be present outside these eggs are going to be a trouble, because there will be a lesser efficiency of these male gametes to fusing with the female gametes, and because of that it is actually a low efficiency process where the lot of environmental factors will play into the picture, where the lot of environmental factor will decide whether the process is going to be successful or not, because everything is happening outside the organism body, and once it is happening outside the organism body, the organism will not have any control over the process. Then because of that, it actually has the second way of doing the same, in which you are actually having the internal fertilization, but external development. The classical examples are the birds and the lizards. So, in these two cases, what happened? The male is actually using a specialized organ to insert the sperms, and so what male is doing is male and they have a female. Okay. So, these two, male and female, are going for mating, okay, and in this process the male is using a specialized organ like known as penis, and that actually is using to insert the male gametes into the female body, and then the fertilization occurs inside female body. Okay. So, once the installation happens, it will form the zygote, and then zygote will get turned into. So, this zygote will be then encapsulate and then it forms the eggs. So, this egg, the fertilized egg, is going to be encapsulated into the shell, and that is actually the egg, which these organisms will put outside their body, and these eggs they will keep it for some time, and then that actually will give rise to the embryo, and then that will give rise. So, embryonic development will take place inside this egg, and then that egg will develop into the adult individual. Now, this process is slightly efficient compared to the process where the external fertilization as well as the external development was taking place, but still In this process also the development is happening outside. So, in many cases this egg now once it comes out from the individual's body, the development depends on many of the environmental factors and many of the environmental stresses, and as well as it is always been vulnerable for being damaged by the particular prey or the particular other organisms. So, that is why this is also more efficient than the previous one, but it is still be primitive in terms of the efficiency of the complete sexual reproduction process. Then the third process comes, and then third process is where you have the internal fertilization and internal development. Okay. So, in this you have the male and female, again the same way, right. This scheme remains the same. Okay. So, this is male is producing the sperm, female is producing the ovum, okay. And then these male and female are going for mating, and because of that the sperm is fusing or fertilizing with the ovum and forming the zygote, and then zygote to embryo, and then embryo to the baby or the young ones. This process is also going to happen inside the body. Because in this process both the fertilization as well as the development take place inside the body, it is a very efficient and tightly controlled process, because during the development the kind of requirement or the kind of the changes required, this can be under the full control of the particular organisms. Okay. So, so far what we have discussed about the fertilization, but and we have discussed how different types of fertilization processes, how a different mode in which the fertilization as well as the development take place. But now we will discuss about how a fertilization actually take place in between a male gamete as well as the female gamete. So, we will take an example of sperm as well as the ovum. So, if you see that the sperm actually contains a head, okay, and it contains a tail, and this tail is the tail actually. So, it actually contains a head and it contains a tail, and this tail is very mobile, and because of that it actually provides the motility into the sperm. Okay. So, once the sperms during the mating, the sperm enters into the female body, the female body already contains a ovum, and ovum is like a normal human cell which actually contains a nucleus in the center. So, this head portion only contains the nucleus, and and this ovum actually contains the is a normal cell which contains all the different types of organelles like endoplasmic reticulum, mitochondria and other kind of organisms, and it also contains the site where these sperm actually can fuse. Okay. And these sites are very peculiar, and they have the cognate ligands on the sperms. Okay. So, during the fertilization process, the several number of sperms, maybe the couple of million sperms enters into the female body, and then they search for these attachment points. Okay. And once they attach the attachment point, so you can imagine that sperm is attached now. Okay. And so, as soon as it attaches, it actually injects its nucleus inside. Okay. And because of that, it will develop the zygote. Okay. So only the nucleus of the sperm goes into the ovum, and it allows that to develop into the zygote. But the all other organelles which are present in the sperm does not go, and because of that the cellular organelles what we contain in our body are normally being comes from the female egg or the ovum, and this actually develops into a new individual. In this whole process, sometime there is a abnormality happened, and that is how you actually see that there are different types of these different types of individuals are born which are identical to each other, or so that because of that kind of the abnormality in this process, sometimes we do not have one individual, we could have the 2 or 3 babies are born from a single ovum, and that process because of that we can have the twins or other multiples. So, once the zygote is formed, the zygote is going to be developed, and that is the third step which is called as the post fertilization events. Okay. So, in the post fertilization event what you have is, so the sperm and the ovums are fertilized with each other and they have formed the zygote. So, zygote which contains the diploid nucleus is a single cell, okay. So, this zygote then get the division. So, with the first division you can have the 2 cells, then you can have second, then you can have 4, this is called 4 cell stage. Then similarly you can have 8 cells, similarly you can have 16 cells, and then you can have 32 cells, and ultimately what you are going to have, you can have a mass of cells. Okay. And these mass of cells which are undifferentiated, which are not different from each other, then goes for a complete process of embryogenesis, which we are not going to discuss, because this part we are going to discuss and in a separate, in a different different lecture. So, then these mass of cells undergoes different types of morphological as well as the different types of developmental changes which falls under the process of embryogenesis, and that is how they will develop the embryo. This embryo then grows and then ultimately will form the baby for after the particular gestational period, and that gestational period is very much different for different organisms. So, this is what we have discussed about the sexual reproduction in a particular organisms, and this involves the production as well as the generation of the germ cells, then their fertilization to form the zygote, and then the zygote undergoes the different types of division, and then embryogenesis to form the new individual. But there is another mode of sexual reproduction which also we would like to discuss, and that is called as the parthenogenesis. So, what is mean by parthenogenesis? So far what we have discussed is that the male is producing male hormone, male is producing the male gamete, the female is producing the female gamete, and that actually is fusing to form the zygote, and that is actually forming the new individual. But in the case of parthenogenesis, okay, what happen is the male is producing the male gamete, female is producing female gamete. Okay. But and these two individuals doesn't go for any kind of fertilizations, and the male is directly giving rise to new individual, female is also giving rise to the new individual without going through the complete process of fertilization, and this mode of sexual reproduction is known as the Parthenogenesis, and this Parthenogenesis could be of natural as well as could be artificial. So, what are the natural mode of Parthenogenesis? It could be complete Parthenogenesis, so the complete is very common in lizards as well as the snake. So, in these cases what happen is the female is producing the egg or the ovum, and this ovum is directly giving rise to new individual. This complete parthenogenesis is require a particular environmental conditions as well as the different types of stresses to go for these kind of changes. Then we have the incomplete parthenogenesis. So, in the incomplete parthenogenesis, incomplete parthenogenesis means that these organisms actually can go for sexual reproduction, means they can have the complete process of formation of male gametes as well as the female gametes, and then they will fuse and form the zygote, and then they will go to the new individual, or they can go for the parthenogenesis depending on the conditions. So, these kind of organisms, the females are actually decides whether they will go for the sexual reproduction or they will go for the parthenogenesis. So, the female actually produces the female gametes, okay, and that female gametes fuses with the male gametes to form the zygote, which is actually, so this is the usual procedure of the sexual reproduction. The female gamete will form the female gamete, and that will also form the new individual. So, in these kind of incomplete parthenogenesis, the female is going for this regular mode of sexual reproduction under the unfavorable condition. Whereas, it goes for the parthenogenesis under the favorable conditions, and the classical example of incomplete parthenogenesis is honeybee, aphids. So, if you remember the honeybee, we have in the honeybee we have the male, we have the female, okay, and we have the queen. Okay. So, the queen is responsible for the developing the colony of the particular honeybee, okay, and the queen is actually going for the sexual reproduction to form the females, and it controls in such a way that it normally forms the female when it goes for the sexual reproduction. When I say sexual reproduction, means when it goes for the mating with the female with the male sex organs, male gametes. So, when the queen forms the female gametes and that fuses with the male gametes, that goes and form the female, and these female could be queen or could be workers, whereas it forms the female gamete and that goes by the Parthenogenesis to the male honeybee. And if you remember, these male are haploids. Okay. So, when the male actually produces the, so that is why it is very unique in the case of honeybee, that when the male actually produces the male gametes, they do not go for the meiosis, they only go for the mitosis to produce the male gametes, because they are haploids. So, with this we have discussed in detail about the different types of reproduction mechanisms in the organisms, and what we have discussed about the asexual reproduction and as well as the sexual reproduction, and we have discussed many aspects of this whole reproductive machinery. Thank you.